You might think when you see me going to install like a transmission seal, I go in, I take the tool and I just smack it in place. Well, that's really not the truth. Yeah, I may be just tapping it in and putting it in place, but it is being set to the right depth, because I want to point out, you can see all these tools, these seal installers that we use, they're stepped. So they're stepped so it puts the seal into the right position and the right depth in the case. And also the shift shaft seal, either for 5 or 6 speeds, I have a different tool for both. You'll see this step here. This makes sure the seal is in the right position when we insert it into the case. You'll also notice on the shift shaft you have these splines that are pretty sharp. What I do is I take some black electrical tape prior to putting the seal on, and I do a wrap around the shaft, and then I put a little light oil on it, so when I slip the seal on, there's no chance of me damaging the seal. I've done it that way for years and years. It's worked out great, and I don't have shift shaft seals that'll come back leaking. Also, we always replace like the snap ring on here. You always use a new one. Any type of snap rings, even on the clutch adjuster, I always replace them with a new snap ring. Also point out, you notice I slipped the quad seal on here with a little light oil. The main transmission, main drive gear spacer here, or the front belt sprocket spacer, they're thicker than the early ones. One of the problems was we were having issues with this nut that's retained. Initially it used to be just retained by a little Allen head screw. Then they went to a plate, because what was happening was the small Allen head screw was snapping over time. Well, the main reason that was happening was that this spacer was thinner, and when it had the load and the torque of the transmission belt sprocket nut on it, it would crush over time, and then it would allow this to start to move, and it, you know, the nut would loosen, it would start to move, and then it would actually snap the retaining Allen's head right off. Harley engineers figured out, hey, this is what the issue is. This is becoming crushed over time. So they increased the diameter here, made it thicker, made this seal larger so this would fit inside the seal, and went with this retainer, and problem solved. We no longer have front belt sprockets coming loose and the nuts falling off and hitting the primary. It was a big issue for a while, but again, great engineers at Harley figured it out. You can also notice that I marked the shift arm with a dot here, so it always goes back in the same position, and we always replace the retaining screw. So when we torque it, I don't have any issues with it breaking. I've had some issues if you try to reuse it over time. If it's been taken out once before, twice before, the head will snap off, so I always replace these. Well, our 38 amp charging system is finally in. Our rotor, nice chrome voltage regulator. Why they put Deutsch connector here on the end, I don't know, because I need to take this off to run it through the case, but no big deal. And our new screws, the screws for the stator are a one-time use only, never reuse them. I've seen those break and I've seen them fall off before and cause major issues. So let's get this together. Be careful when you're putting the rotor on. I always use the tool here that holds it. You don't want to get your finger stuck in here when the magnets get near that stator. It will pull right in. You can lose your fingers, so you don't want to do that. Always use the tool. All right, another thing I like to show you is the use of silicone. Guys get all nervous about using silicone. The motor company used silicone to mount the inner primaries until we had the later sealing screws. So you go, and from the back side, once your cover's clean, you just put a small amount of silicone around all 8 holes. And another trick I do here in the shop is on my primary mounting screws and primary cover screws, I use, once I've cleaned the screws, I actually use another product made by Loctite called Loctite Primer. I prime all the bolts, then put the Loctite on. You get a much better bond. I have found that acetone also works because Loctite Primer, even if you smell it, it smells like acetone. Or get some acetone, dip the bolt in it, clean it up, and then put the Loctite on and torque them to spec. Just want to point something out. So the earlier bikes, these would have been torqued, say, up to 05, 160, 165 foot-pounds. Then in 06, they wanted you to torque it to 75 foot-pounds and then move it another 40 to 50 degrees. The reason they do that is for what's called friction torque. What I do, I still like to use the 160, 165 foot-pounds, but what I will do to make sure I have a very accurate torque, I will run a thread chase through here, not a tap, a chase. I think it's 7/8 by 14 through this bolt or screw first. Totally clean, there's no residual Loctite. I'll thread it on by hand, make sure there's no resistance. Good. Use our red Loctite, and then oil under the head of the bolt. Used it's kind of a neoprene primary locking tool. You're going to go on the top strand on the clutch side to tighten this. You got to make sure your primary adjuster is always loose and down. If you try to do this up, you can damage this adjuster, you can break it. Just have to be careful it's not bound up also. You could do damage to the primary. That compressor always comes on when I don't want it to. Makes a lot of noise. What I like to do is my initial torque I will do to 100. So 100 foot-pounds, torque it. Make sure it feels smooth, that's good. I'm going to back it off. So I have to move my adjuster here to the front. My locking tool, not an adjuster, sorry. Move it to the front, back this off. Now I'm going to go to my 165. You know, I have the digital torque wrenches. I don't use them that often. I'm so old school. I still like the click ones. It's funny, but it's getting harder to see all the time with the old eyesight. That's okay. Okay, 165. Double check that. Yep. We're gonna have to move this again. Be careful with your hands in here too. Always careful, always make sure the battery's disconnected. Safety first. Never be in that much of a hurry to not be safe. So now, we're gonna bring this up to our 165. Fantastic. And we will do the clutch hub now. We'll move this locking tool to the front and we will set our clutch hub at 80 foot-pounds and we're done. Again, that's a little different than the factory. I gave you the reason why they were doing it that way. Also, I will not start this bike now for 24 hours. I will let all this Loctite dry. You don't want to oil wash the threads. That's how these will back off over time because if the Loctite's not set up, the oil wicks its way into the threads and then you'll end up having a compensator nut that will back off or a clutch up. Very common. The factory had a big issue with that, especially when they were up in production. Like in 06 when they were trying to get it up to, was it 349,000 units? I think that was their maximum that they've ever produced. There were issues with this. You have to make sure the Loctite, give it a chance to dry. And instead of Loctite Primer today, I'm going to use some acetone. Again, be careful with this stuff. It can damage paint pretty easily. I just use a little bit. I used to have a squirt bottle for this, but I dropped it. It was made of glass. It broke. So I just give a little bit out of the can. Dry it off. Again, red Loctite. Just a little, not too much. And I will tell you right now, I just can't remember the last time I've ever had a clutch hub or a front compensating sprocket, screw or bolt, whatever you want to call it, come loose. It's been a long, long time. You can see how easy that's going on. There's no resistance. Everything's been cleaned. We have our 80 foot-pounds. There's our 80. Make sure we take out our locking tool. Now we're going to adjust our primary chain. 5/8, half inch to 5/8 in the tight spot. Cold is where I like to see them, somewhere in between that range. I will rotate the engine over so I can find the tight spot, because these chains have a loose spot and a tight spot. So you're gonna have to roll it over, find the tight spot, get your adjustment, and you're good to go. So I'm just moving the adjuster shoe to get it close and have just snugged it up. Now I'm gonna rotate the engine over. You notice I've pulled the plugs. You may also notice I don't use a lot of air in certain circumstances, like removing plugs. You see guys, they'll remove the plugs using air. I don't like to do that. I've had situations where the threads have galled up before because someone didn't put anti-seize on the threads of the plugs, or they over torqued them. There's some aluminum in there, and I've actually seen guys with air go, it hangs up and snaps the plug. I want to be able to feel it as I'm taking it out. So that's the reason I do that. Yes, it takes a little more time, but I have less problems. Now, you remember how loose that looked before? Look how tight that is. I can't even barely move it. I need to go down one notch. And now, I'm going to torque this. Always make sure the retaining snap ring is on the shoe. Unless you have the real early bikes and they didn't have that. And now, that actually feels pretty good. I've done enough of these, I don't necessarily have to use a ruler, but that's just about 5/8. What we're going to do is rotate the engine. Might be able to go up one more notch. We'll give that a shot. Never hurts to double check. Oh, I already had that on there. And we will rotate it again, just to make sure we're good. Again, don't get your hands in here. That seems pretty good. And the ruler, there it is. That's a half right there. Half inch. So half inch, we're good. Now we'll put in our adjuster. Always use a new snap ring. We'll put the plugs back in, torque them 15 foot-pounds with some anti-seize, get the primary cover installed, the oil in it, and we'll be good to go. And we'll fire it up tomorrow and check the charging system to make sure everything's good. One last thing I have to mention, we still do have to install the new regulator, which is here. Really not much for you to see. I'm going to disconnect it from here, put the new one on, run the new wires all the way back to the main breaker behind the panel that sits in front of the rear wheel, and that's it. So it'll take me a little bit of time, but nothing for you to really see. So do that probably right now, and again, I'll see you in the morning where we'll test the charging and go for a nice test ride. All right, we've let all our Loctite dry overnight. I've installed our new regulator, and just a note, the wire from the regulator that runs back to the circuit breaker, make sure you don't cut and splice that with a connector. You can have water intrusion, a bad connection. It's just not the right way to go. Run the wire all the way back to the main breaker and you'll be good to go. All right, let's take our Midtronics tester and we're going to hook it up and test our charging system. Positive first, and our ground. And it's going to run us through some prompts here. Location in the vehicle, AGM. And we're going to do 310 cold cranking amps. Okay, that's good. We're going to start the engine. Cranking was normal. Now it's going to ask us to push and check the charging. And our charging voltage is okay. And we'll press and print. And that's it. We'll give this receipt to the customer, let them know the bike's charging fine, and we'll get it off the bench. Gonna get it outside, wash her up, detail it, take it for a test ride, and on to the next one. Thanks for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe on Facebook and YouTube. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions or anything, just send us an email or give us a comment. And I mean, I get back to you right away because I'm pretty busy, but eventually I see the comments and I do get back to you. So we got a lot going on in the shop. Twin cam big bore engine getting ready to go together. M8 2017 big bore kit we're going to do. We are starting the Springer front end project. That's on a bench over here. And the big dog parts are on order. We'll get part 2 and probably part 3 of that video in the not too distant future. So thanks again. Talk to you later.